That's right. I filmed 2 videos today in the same shirt. I don't know why I felt like that was necessary to talk about, but let's talk about We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. So, We Are Legion is a fantastic and deliciously short sci-fi novel, as my buddy Alan would say, where we follow Bob Johansson. That's his name. I read the book, I promise. So we follow Bob Johansson, and this is sort of a modern day sci-fi story where he has found himself in a lot of cash. And what he plans to do with that cash is fund a future endeavor. So he takes his money to a company called Cryo Eterna Incorporated, and he decides to put all this money down on essentially freezing his brain upon death, so that in the future he can be sort of brought back to life in whatever future exists, and however many years that takes. Now, he did this because cryonics have become this big thing in society. He's a huge sci-fi nerd. So immediately after making this decision, I mean, the book the book starts off, this is literally the first line of the book. So you'll cut my head off. There's no point in freezing and retaining his entire body upon death, but they cut his head off, keep his head basically on ice until a time comes when they can reestablish him in society, and hopefully he'll be part of whatever exists hundreds of years from now, potentially. So he puts all of his money in this cryogenics company. For like years down in the future, when he dies, he'll be frozen, he'll come back later, right? So he's at the convention, and he's talking with all these people. They're kind of like, his friends are kind of joking with him about like, wow, you put your money into this, that's kind of crazy. Like, what are you going to do? Like, aren't you going to be sad about like, if like your girlfriend and your ex and your friends, your family, everybody's gone and you're alive again? Isn't that going to be weird? He's like, whatever. So that is his, decades in the future. That's his plan. On his deathbed, he'll be cryogenically frozen and brought back at some point when medicine and technology allows for it. That, of course, is cut short when he is promptly hit by a car and killed. So this immediately sets you up with sort of a ridiculous premise. Maybe potentially hundreds of years from now, that's a possibility. But right now, it's a ridiculous premise. And you start off with a lot of comedy up front with him just kind of talking to this cryo robot about signing this paperwork. And then he sees a car coming, and he's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Gets hit by a car, dead. Wakes up 100 years later. And he does not have a body. He is just an AI. He doesn't even have a head. He's sort of waking up in this lab and wondering what's going on. And there's sort of this doctor, psychiatrist kind of guy talking to him. So he wakes up in the year 2133. He's sort of gaining his bearings. He's wondering like where his body is. Why can't he move? It's because he's an AI. His brain has essentially been uploaded into a robot. He is no longer a human. He has no rights. And corpse sickles, as it says on the book, they've had all their rights stripped away. So he's not a person. He's not recognized by society as a human. And he is now property of this sort of, what's the best way of putting this? Hyper-religious zealot government, where he is basically, everything's like named after faith in the Bible, and it's very heavily religious-based government. The doctor sort of explains to him how America and the world has kind of gone through these, ebbs and flows of politics, where you go, really hard against religion, and then you had a super religious government that kind of took hold of society. And if he does not agree to become this AI and tasked with, being shipped out into space and finding other habitable planets, they will turn him off and he will just cease to exist forever. So obviously not really given much of a choice. He has to do that. So that is where the story really takes off, is Bob going through these iterations and versions of himself to go out into space. And every iteration of him is a little bit different. They take different names. They have sort of different traits. It's almost as if like they're like a what if, or like certain personality traits dominate other ones in like each iteration of Bob, to where he could be a bunch of different people essentially. And that's sort of the main cast, is like different variations or versions of Bob doing this task and sort of coordinating and cooperating with themselves. So it's it's a super interesting idea, and it's pretty heavy on the sci-fi at times. It doesn't really bog you down with too much technical stuff, but it definitely gets into it a little bit. There's a lot of wit, there's a lot of humor. It's pretty dry humor, but that's great for me because I love that kind of stuff. And you even get some emotional moments where, I mean, Bob's an AI. He's been an AI now for decades throughout the story. He'll think back to his family at times where it's like they've been dead for 100 years. So you deal with a lot emotionally with this character, even though he's an AI. So that's really, really interesting, actually. And one of the really interesting aspects of this is because it's sort of like a Star Trek plot at times where, you know, you're exploring different galaxies, you're exploring the vast, endless space, and you find these, you know, primitive civilizations. So at one point, Bob actually finds this the civilization that they're sort of like humanoid creatures, and they're being attacked by another sort of like variation of a gorilla. They're called gorilloids. And these people are primitive, though, and they don't really understand technology. But Bob sort of watches them evolve over time. Like they figure out how to make spears. They find flint. They understand how to make like sharper points. And he sort of starts wanting to help them. And that's usually a big no-no. Like, you kind of have to let societies and things build themselves, and you can't really tamper with that. Like, that's a big Star Trek thing where it's like you can't just like show yourself to them and change the world. You kind of have to let things happen as they are meant to happen at times. But Bob sort of starts to play God a little bit, and it gets a little bit interesting in that sense of like, should people really be doing this? Is this something that you kind of just have to let things happen naturally, or can you sort of meddle? Because, I mean, he's this super smart AI from the future, essentially going down to cavemen, basically, and sort of teaching them things and giving them materials and teaching them how to do certain things. So that there's this whole theme of whether or not that's even okay. One of my favorite parts of this book is, as much as I enjoyed Ready Player One for what it was, it is very info dumpy and sort of just name dropping for the sake of name dropping without actual context to the story. Dennis E. Taylor in We Are Legion drops a lot of pop culture references, talks about Star Trek, mentions all sorts of nerdy shit, but he does it in a way that's sort of nuanced and makes sense in the story for this character, his own interests and society, like things that they would have appreciated or had known about, because this is our world just in the future. So he does it in a really smart way and mixes them way better than Ernest Cline did in Ready Player One, even to the point where one of Bob's versions calls himself Homer and talks like Homer from The Simpsons. So it's hilarious. And again, the audiobook knocks us out of the park in that aspect because you have different versions of Bob with different characters, different voices. It's hilarious. My one main, I guess, negative, and it's sort of nitpicky, is this just very much felt like a part one of a story as opposed to a standalone, because it is a series, but it doesn't really, the way it ends is sort of abrupt, and it's almost like a continuation, or like a to be continued should pop up at the end, and that's fine. I just wanted a little bit more out of the conclusion of this. It didn't feel like it was totally finished, but I'm definitely going to keep reading because it's interesting, and I want to see where this goes from here, because there's so much that you could do with somebody who's been cryo-frozen, uploaded into an AI hundreds of years later, and just explores the cosmos. Like, there's so much you could do with this. So I definitely want to see where this goes. I will be continuing this, and I love how short these sci-fi books are. A 300-page book is just, it's beautiful. So that's going to do it for We Are Legion, We Are Bob. I highly recommend this if you are into sci-fi. It is a solid blend of sort of modern storytelling and writing where you have more character focus, which is sort of unusual for like a classic sci-fi feel to the book. So it blends those two perfectly, and I would recommend this to just about anybody. So definitely check this one out. And of course, like and subscribe as always. Do hit up Patreon if you want to support the channel financially. That is, of course, always optional, but always appreciated. I will be using much of my book spending money in the future on more sci-fi because I'm really starting to dig it and want to get into more of it. So look for more sci-fi coming in the rest of the year. Definitely jump into Discord though, or leave me a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on We Are Legion, or what are some other sci-fi books that you like and want to share with the world. So definitely let me know in the comments down below. So until next time, guys, keep reading.